Hello, and welcome to this somewhat quick crash course in being an alpha reader. In this video, I'll go over what your responsibilities are as an alpha reader, as well as how to be effective as one. Now first, what is an alpha reader? Well, many authors have their own definitions for what an alpha reader is, and they use them for different things, but in this case, an alpha reader is referring to someone who reads the book in an early form, usually like a second draft or something like that, and helps the author, which in this case is me, find large-scale, mid-scale problems with the story and helps fix those. So basically your job would be to read the story and find problems with it, and find good things as well. Pretty simple, right? Though I welcome feedback for any problems you find, there are three main elements that I'm looking for feedback on. They are plot, character, and progress. First, let's talk about plot. As you read the story, pay attention to the overall narrative. My goal is to write a story that makes sense, is consistent, flows well all the way through, and keeps readers engaged. If you reach a point in the story that doesn't make sense to you, then write it down. If there's a part where you got bored reading it, write that down. If there's a part where there's so much going on, things are happening way too fast, you can't keep up, write that down. If at any point something in the story breaks your immersion or halts your enjoyment of the story, write it down. Another thing to pay attention to while reading is character. My goal is to write characters that are realistic, yet compelling and interesting to read about. Realistic may not be the right word, actually. Maybe more believable. That's more accurate. I want each character to be distinct and have a unique voice. If you notice a character begins acting in a way contrary to how their character's been established, then write that down. If some characters are too similar to each other, write that down. If any characters act in a way that takes you out of the story, write it down. And lastly, the main thing to pay attention to, progress. Every chapter should give a sense of progress, whether that be the character physically progressing toward a location or an item or some sort of physical goal, characters progressing and learning some sort of skill, or simply progress in a more internal character growth sort of progress. There should not be a chapter in the story where there is no progress. Every chapter should have at least one type of progress, preferably more, but at least one. So, it's not necessarily your job to try and offer up solutions. I do welcome suggestions for solutions, right? But that being said, the most helpful feedback you can give is simply pointing out things that stood out to you as there's something wrong with it, right? And being, very importantly, as detailed as you can, right? So let me give some examples of feedback on levels from least effective to most effective. Now, let's say you read a chapter in which you feel like things are moving really slowly, you get bored, certain character dialogue is too stilted and doesn't land, right? So first we have not effective.
Chapter 12 sucked.
Right, not detailed at all, doesn't help me figure out why you didn't like that chapter, anything like that. Somewhat effective.
I didn't enjoy Chapter 12 because I found it boring. You should put an action scene in.
All right, now we're getting somewhere. I knew before you didn't like the chapter, right? Chapter 12 sucked, but I didn't know why it sucked for you. In this, it's pointed out that you found it boring, so at least that gives a little more insight. The action scene suggestion is not, unfortunately, helpful at all, because that may not be the proper solution for whatever's wrong with the chapter. Now, moving on to a more effective feedback.
Chapter 12 was slow and boring to me. The characters didn't really do anything, and the big emotional moment John had didn't land for me because the dialogue wasn't good.
Now this is much better. I can do a lot with this, right? I know what the main issues are that the reader had with the chapter. I know areas to work on and focus on. Now here we go, most effective, right?
During Chapter 12, I got very bored. The story slowed down, and I didn't feel like the characters were making any progress toward their physical goal. As well, the character moments that were there didn't quite land for me, and I didn't feel like I learned anything about the characters either. Overall, it kind of halted all the momentum that had been built up in previous chapters, particularly the build-up to John's big emotional payoff. I feel like the dialogue was too clunky and kind of took me out of the moment. It just wasn't believable.
Now this is just about perfect. Describes exactly how you felt in regard to certain elements, what stood out as being wrong. I can do so much with this, right? That's an example of the kind of detail I'm looking for, right? Now, it's not required to write specific feedback for each chapter, but I do strongly encourage it. Knowing your thoughts about each specific chapter will be the most helpful, right? I would suggest that you keep a notebook or something to write in or whatever open as you read, so that after each chapter you can write down thoughts and feedback and stuff. And lastly, and very importantly, if there's anything you come across that you think is really good and should definitely be kept in later drafts, write it down. It would be a real shame if there was something that was actually really good and everyone thought it was amazing, but they didn't tell me, and I couldn't see that it was amazing and it got cut in later drafts because no one told me, right? All right, now let's do a quick summary, shall we? 3 elements to pay attention to. Plot. Does the story make sense? Is it consistent? How is the pacing? How was your immersion in the story? Character. Are the characters believable? Do they each have distinct characterization and voice? Do you care about what happens to the main characters? Why or why not? Progress. Does each chapter have a sense of progress to it, whether physically, emotionally, or plot-wise? Is the progress made in each chapter earned? And of course, to be most effective, make sure you are as detailed as you can be. Make sure you explain how specific things make you feel, especially the parts that aren't good. Don't try and fix anything. Simply point out problems and, if possible, point out which elements specifically have problems as best you can. And lastly, make sure you let me know if there's anything that should definitely be kept in because it's really good. And that's that. I hope now you have a better idea of what I'm looking for in you as an alpha reader. If you have any questions, make sure to send them my way. Now go forth and read.